I want to bring up some of the splits because over the last few days, maybe over the last week, we heard players more and more talk about, Josh Allen's injury and how Stephon Diggs talked about how, weeks 1 to 9, like they were humming on offense.
Mhm.
And then they just, as someone said in the chat, it looked like that, from week 10 on into the playoffs, that it was just so difficult for them. It was almost like pulling teeth each drive, each play. And I do agree with that feeling. So I want to look at some of the stats. We had Andrew go ahead and look up some of the tendencies. And so we did it by the splits that everyone has been talking about, mainly weeks 1 through 9. And then, weeks 10 to the playoffs. And some of the, the big things that stand out when it comes to the Bills' offensive tendencies, when you use those weeks as a split, are the average time to throw. So in the first 9 weeks, the Bills' average time to throw was 2.77. And keep in mind, this is all Bills quarterbacks. So there were some snaps in there, I believe, for Keenum. I looked it up just for Josh Allen, and it was actually lower. It was like 2.65. But this gives you, relatively speaking, how the offense was getting rid of the ball, in the first half of the year versus the second half. And you can see percentage of throws under 2.5 seconds was 52.8% as opposed to 43.9%. And that's what I want you guys to key in on. So 2.5 seconds, getting the ball out quickly. That was something they did really well in the first half. And Josh Allen was one of the best quarterbacks in the first 9 weeks because they were able to get rid of the ball so quickly. And then the second half, again, you see the average time to throw in weeks 10 through the divisional round, 3.08 seconds average time to throw. So he was holding on to the ball longer. They were obviously pushing the ball down the field further. You see some of the 2.5 seconds, the percentage of throws under 2.5 seconds, that dropped to 43.9%. And then you can see some of the ratios and how they changed. The big time throw percentage from first to second half actually went up, and his turnover plays, worthy plays, went down, which in many ways it didn't feel that way, right, Anthony?
Yeah, it felt like as the season went on, if anything, if you had to ask somebody like, oh, what would you bet, from a turnover worthy play perspective, like from weeks 10 through the division round, I think everybody would say it was higher than weeks 1 through 9 because of him actually turning the ball over, then pushing the ball further downfield. And you saw the impact on this offense. And again, it was a combination of things. They were calling those concepts to go down the field. And it was also, some of it was also on Josh, going big game hunting or big play hunting, as people are mentioning in the chat, and having some options underneath, but wanting to take that kill shot, or when he turns the ball over, instead of the next drive being like, okay, let's settle down, let's get in the game. In his mind, he's like, no, I need to make up double now for what just happened.
Yeah.
And then Ken Dorsey has a similar mindset. So he's like, yeah, let's go out and get blood right now. And you saw it affected. You saw how it affected the offense from an advanced metric perspective and standpoint, like we just showed.
Yeah, and so if we advance through some of these other stats, courtesy of PFF, so the first 9 weeks, drop passes per game were 1.5. From the weeks 10 on, 2.4. So that was a big increase. Yak percentage went down from 42.4% to 31.2%. EPA per play went down 0.229 to 0.059. Again, ADOT went up. That was obvious. And most of that happened. It started to go up right at that Jets Miami sequence where Josh just admitted that about 4 weeks after that injury, his arm started feeling better. And that's when they kind of kicked up the ADOT. But you can see it went up from 9.7 to 11.3 from first to second half. And then the open attempt percentage just means it's like PFF's way of saying guys are open or not. And it dropped about 5% or so. So I think when you look at some of these stats and splits, we went through so many different stats, Andrew and I, trying to find tendencies, things that stood out. And, I came into this show, Anthony, I told you before we went live, I came into this show thinking like, it was I had a pretty balanced view of this offense. And some of it was Josh, something like you just said, right? Kind of balance it. But I went through all these stats and I went through all this film looking at specific quadrants, 0 to 9 yards and all that good stuff. And I just came away, I don't know, the last 2 hours just before we went live, that Josh actually played pretty good, all things considered. But some of the things we talked about, like the offensive line, some of the weapons with the drops, as you just saw. I mean, look at how the weapons for the Bills fared against man coverage in the first to second half. Look at the drop percentage in weeks 1 to 9 against man coverage, 1.8%. And then weeks 10 and above, 11.9%.
That's
That's
huge. A
huge.
10 percentage point increase is a huge, like, I don't, I just want people to really understand that. To say like, oh, it only went up 10 percentage points. Percentage points, it takes a lot for a percentage point to go up. A 10.1 percentage point increase is massive.
Yeah. And then look at the big time throw percentage against man coverage, 3.3% to 11.1%. So Josh was big game hunting, but he was actually that Miami game. Remember that we did all 7 explosive passes in that game late in the year. So you can see the A.dot rose from 8.9 to 14.3 versus man coverage, but also that quick pressure percentage, which is pressure on Josh Allen in 2.5 seconds or less. That actually increased as well from 29.5% to 35.3% against man coverage. Again, so it's one thing that we've talked about recently with the Bills offense is the Bills lost their fastball in many ways. And it's something that I want to talk about here in a second about the weapons that he had this year. And I always compare it to 2020, right? That was the height of this offense and how it was just always humming. They didn't slow down. They were one of the most efficient offenses in the league. So when I look back at that and I see, late in the year, them go out and re-sign Cole Beasley and re-sign John Brown, that tells me that they're trying to get back to 2020. And that tells me what they need going forward.
And then also real quick, for Brett, A.dot is average depth of target. So basically how far the person he's throwing the ball to is downfield. So if somebody is 5 yards from the line of scrimmage and that's who Josh targets, his average depth of target is 5 on that play. And then you obviously take it within all the targets and average it out on a per target basis. Good question. Also, good job, AJ, bringing that question up. Yeah, we saw, so them also trying to find that easy button again that they had in 2020 by going back to those guys. But it also speaks to them acknowledging or realizing like, we don't have that on the team right now. And I think that also speaks to, again, we're not giving anybody a pass, but when you're looking at everything holistically, yes, there was some on Ken Dorsey. Yes, there was some on Josh Allen from a decision-making standpoint, but his weapons were inconsistent in terms of their reliability. His offensive line was inconsistent in terms of their reliability. You saw the quick pressure numbers. You saw the increases in drop percentage versus man coverage. You saw the open attempt percentage in the graphic before that. And when you take that coupled with not having the consistency from the slot and the consistency to impact the middle of the field and be a safety blanket for Josh and or open up other avenues for the offense, it was a cascading effect negatively for this offense. And the Bills didn't have that diversity in their skill set amongst their weapons in order to combat that and really kind of flow or evolve as a position group. And I think that hindered what Josh was able to do, but I also think it hindered what Ken Dorsey was able to do as well.
Yeah.
And again, I know everybody wants Dorsey's head on a stick, and so I don't want to seem like a Ken Dorsey apologist, but everybody keeps talking about a lot of, well, you got to scheme guys open and you got to scheme this. And yes, like how usage from a player stems from what coordinators and coaches decide to do, but players' skill sets and traits and abilities decide how they are able to be used and what situations they can be put in. And again, at the end of the day, it was an amalgamation and combination of a bunch of things that resulted in some sluggishness for this offense. And if we're just looking at it from a Josh Allen standpoint, yeah, we saw how his weapons and the offensive line really, not to be so harsh, but brought him down and put even more onto his plate. And, I think that also contributed to him playing a little more of that hero ball and trying to do more big game hunting. He'll never say it, but I think in his mind, he knew this offensive line isn't reliable and my weapons are dropping some balls. I need to go and make a play. And then that compounded. And I think that contributed to his decision-making, which is still on him, but everything's all connected and kind of how this team chased its tail a little bit as the season went on.